Welcome to Nuances, Beyond First Impressions with the Asian Diaspora.
I'm Ariadna Milla, a Filipino-American from a small town on the southern border in Texas.
I'm Sherilyn Lee, a new American with Chinese-Mauritian roots.
Together, we wanted to create a safe space where everyone feels welcome to learn more about the AAPI community.
We hope that through the personal stories we'll hear, we'll all get a glimpse of the humanity behind the stereotypes, how we have so much in common in some ways and so little in other ways.
Asian Americans were not allowed to vote in the U.S. until 1952. We have all seen how our rights are regressing today. And so if you are a U.S. citizen in Oklahoma, South Carolina, Illinois, Colorado, Mississippi, or Utah, please remember to vote in your state primary or state primary runoff on June 28th this week.
Before we get into our conversation with Sally, we'd like to take a moment to define some terms that come up. Resident Student Leader, this is also called Resident Advisor or RA. They are trained college-age mentors who help create supportive and safe environments for students living in student housing. Orientalism is the representation of the Middle East and Asia in a stereotyped way that is regarded as embodying a colonialist attitude. Colonialism is defined as control by one power over a dependent area or people. The subjugated area may be exploited, and its population exploited, assimilated into the dominating power, displaced, or exterminated to make room for settler populations. Microaggressions are commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental slights, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative attitudes towards stigmatized or culturally marginalized groups. Plurality or spiritual pluralism is an attitude or policy regarding the diversity of religious or spiritual belief systems coexisting in society. Islamophobia is the dislike of or prejudice against Islam or Muslims, especially as a political force. Sally is a Taiwanese-Coquitlamite-Torontonian Canadian, working in higher education supporting equitable, diverse, and inclusive student and student leader life beyond the classroom. Sally, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. We're excited to have you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I'm excited to have you partly because I feel like you are responsible for making me woke.
Oh, wow. This is a big honor.
For those who don't know, Sally and I have been friends since university. We were in the same residence together. When I moved to Toronto, I didn't really know anything about feminism, LGBTQ rights, and any of that. I was very apolitical, and I was happy to just live my life trying to make music and getting an engineering degree at the same time. I don't remember exactly what we talked about, but I feel like you were the first person to open me up to that kind of stuff. So that's why I was really excited to have you come on the show.
Wow. Again, thank you. A really big honor. Obviously, I have my people that I look up to myself in this area, but a lot of times I feel like I'm still learning and there's a lot of things I've yet to really understand. But yeah, it's nice to know that there are others that are following me.
Why don't you give us a little background on your life? I think you have a pretty unique situation. Unique, but also there's a lot of people who do it.
Yeah, thank you, Ariadne, for the introduction. I'm just going to go down that entire hyphenate and then we'll pretty much cover my entire life. I'm from Taiwan, which is a small island in East, Southeast Asia, somewhere around there. I immigrated to Vancouver when I was around 7ish. Coquitlam is the actual city that I grew up in, but not a lot of people know about the city Coquitlam, so Vancouver is the closest major metropolitan area. Grew up there. It was a community that had a lot of people in the similar family situation as myself and my families. It was families who came to Canada to raise their kids, and the spouses would be split up. So one of the spouses, either the mother or father, in most cases the mother, is the one that is here raising the kids, bringing the kids to school, etc., etc. And the fathers, not always the fathers, but at the very least in my observation, the fathers are the ones that are back in the home country. In most cases it was Taiwan and Hong Kong, to make money and continue working and sending money to the family. So that was the kind of community that I grew up in, and then came to Toronto for my undergrad at the University of Toronto and got involved in residence life here, mostly from being a student mentor, and then I progressed to being a resident student leader. And then, went into professional work in that particular field for a pretty long time until recently going into the student services field, which is a related field, just living outside of residence.
I didn't know that there was such a big community of people who had split up the two spouses. So why was it that the dads or both spouses like wouldn't move? Was it just harder to get jobs in Canada? Because I know in Canada, it can be difficult to get a job if you don't have prior Canadian experience, which is a vicious cycle.
Yes, yeah, it's applicable to any immigrant who arrives in Canada, whether they're by themselves or with a family. Yeah, lots of people are highly qualified, and people would come to Canada probably under skilled immigration schemes and things like that. However, even then, it's harder to land opportunities that are commensurate with your skill level, your education level, and the money that you should be compensated given your skills and experiences in Canada. Even if you perhaps don't have to start over from scratch, you're still going back down a few paces. So probably for a lot of spouses, it was easier to maintain that career that's back in the home region or home country and have family and send money this way instead, which I feel is maybe counterintuitive to the way people perceive immigrant families. Perhaps a lot of times people are like, oh, it's the singular individual working here and sending money back home. That actually wasn't my experience of immigrant families growing up.
Yeah, I remember when we were in residence together, there were a few students who were in dentistry or something, and they were fully qualified in some other country, and then they had to start all over. And that's the unfortunate reality for people who are trying to move to Canada or the US that a lot of people who are based here don't know. It's really hard to be immigrants.
When I was a kid, my orthodontist assistant, she's actually a dentist in Mexico, but she was the orthodontist assistant here.
Yeah.
And like family members I know who were doctors back in the Philippines don't practice here because,
Yeah, they would have to start over.
Yeah, and the language thing is a huge barrier too. Never mind picking up survival English. If you want to translate your career from your home region over here, it's a lot more other technical English that you have to learn. In the late 1990s in Taiwan, there was some level of English education happening. It wasn't standardized, like you gotta take English. And I'm sure class had something to do with it. If you were maybe a little bit more well off, you could afford those like English lessons, or you could afford a private tutor. My brother and I had some level of English education before we got here, but we certainly had to pick up a lot. In my case, my dad, the one that stayed in the home region, my mom had to pick up English for sure. And all of the other moms, probably same thing. We were all in the same community of all the moms spoke Mandarin or spoke Cantonese. There were definitely environments where they could stick to their home language, but navigating the Canadian world, definitely use of English and stuff they all had to work to pick up, just like we did. Only they probably had a tougher time of it because they were all in their 30s by then. So
did you go back to Taiwan a lot?
I went back to Taiwan, I would say once every 1 or 2 years, probably growing up. And it was pretty quick. When I got to Canada, I was around grade 3. So I want to say in about 3 or 4 years, going back to Taiwan, I was already feeling distinctly not Taiwanese. Even though I'm still speaking Mandarin at home, like a lot of East Asiatic kids, I got put through Chinese school on Saturdays. The language proficiency is still there, but yeah, you'd be surprised if anybody has picked up a second language. You would know if you just didn't practice how much you lose and how fast the slang evolves. And we'll go back and use a slang word and they would be like, are you from the late 90s? Because your slang is stuck at the late 90s. I didn't pick up any of the more recent slang terms. Yeah, here the gender roles and the gender expression and the perception of femininity is a little bit different in North America compared to Asia. I'm a little bit taller. My natural voice is a little bit lower. I don't wear makeup all the time going out. If I'm in a clothing store, I wouldn't necessarily go for super frilly feminine fashion styles. It's not critical per se, but if I went back, it would be a fairly clear marker that this person has been living abroad, which is really weird because in North America, people would still look at me and be like, oh yeah, this is a girl. It wouldn't be at all, she's androgynous.
Yeah. Do you feel Canadian?
I would say so, yes, at this point. When I was growing up, I was lucky that the middle schools and high schools that I went to had a fairly sizable population of East Asiatic kids. So there was a lot of examples around me of people who held the same combination of social identities and were navigating through the same problem. You have teachers coming down on you for speaking Mandarin in the hallways, or you commiserate about maths and parental expectations, that sort of thing. And in high school, everyone's going into maths, economics, accounting, the STEM fields. In university area, I was like, I like literature. I don't want to do an English major. And people were like, oh, an English major. Like in the sort of like, wow, okay. Like inside you're like, I don't know about this kind of.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you have similar experience. Most people involved to some degree in music, whether that's the school band or you have your own lessons in music. So that was the kind of environment. I would say, despite experiencing a lot of the similar, yeah, I'm Asian Canadian and that sort of thing, even without articulating it, the good thing was I had a community of kids that were going through the same thing. So I would say that level of awareness was probably there, even if I didn't know how to articulate it. I think the change was probably thinking about it from a power structure standpoint, because before it was like, I'm Asian Canadian, and it was everyone's one big happy family, diversity, Canadian mosaic sense of diversity. And yeah, I would say now it's a little bit different.
So how has that changed? Walk us through that.
Two things. One is probably the English major choice, actually. Just from a pure immigrant experience standpoint, there's lots of movies and media pieces made about this immigrant experience, like the first generation immigrant drive to succeed, and that downloaded onto the 1.5 second generation immigrants, balancing that desire to the drive to the need to survive versus the drive to live a life that is maybe more in alignment with what has been talked to about Canadian or North American values of individualism and chasing your dreams. Definitely one of the first questions I got asked was, well, what are you going to do with an English degree? Being asked about that, it's something that anybody with a degree that people can't easily see transferability into a very clear career path probably all get asked that. I got to University of Toronto, and not only did I do an English major, I also did an East Asian Studies major, an area studies major, which my mom was and area studies are a field of social science / humanities combined together. But yeah, East Asian Studies, what, you're going to become a professor? What can you do with an East Asian Studies degree? It wasn't a combination of degrees that, these two in combination is applicable to some sort of career. I chose these two areas of study out of my own interest. So I really was like, I'm going to be North American, chase my dreams. So navigating through that is my first change from I'm Asian Canadian and I'm just going to contribute to the great mosaic of Canada. That was, I was like, okay, I feel like I'm a little bit different from that. The second was probably me realizing that I'm bi in my teenage years. It wasn't dramatic. I was just realizing I wasn't really getting the other common teenage experiences. The girls crowding together and they're like giggling about the boy, and you're ribbing each other about, are you going out with so-and-so, blah, 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 that sort of thing. Yeah, I wasn't really getting that. And I was like, okay, look, I feel like I'm a little bit different from there. So yeah, I would say those are two starting points. And then university really just like...
Yeah, I feel like university in general is when a lot of things change.
Yeah, people say high school is coming of age. Yes, I agree. High school is a coming of age, but university is a real coming of age.
I agree. I feel like that's when I actually grew. There was some in high school, but you're living alone in university and you're learning to survive on your own.
Yeah, it's a lot more exploratory. You have a lot more room to do that. And I was a real homebody, so I did not want to be punted all the way across the country to go to the University of Toronto. So having been punted across the country, I didn't like it at the time, but I feel like it was probably helpful in the end because it was just me here poking around, trying to grow and apply my interests into a post-secondary experience.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a very different person from who I was when I first got there, Canada. And I hope the people who only met me then don't remember me. I am such a different person.
That's how I feel about high school reunions or any kind of grade school reunion. So I had a really good elementary school grade 5 class. We had an incredible teacher. That class was so amazing. And a while ago, someone found some old class picture and tagged everybody on it. Suddenly there was some sort of reunion being organized. And yeah, I get that feeling. Okay, I'm like a really different person now.
On Facebook, it gives you memories of statuses you posted. I see the ones I posted in high school and I'm like, why did I...
Yeah, I've gone through and deleted a bunch.
Yeah, social media actually was huge because I was in grade 12 when Facebook was first out and people were like, oh, Facebook, we're going to be Facebook friends. And Facebook used to have this notes function where you could create essentially, yes, you remember that little blog posts. Basically, Facebook had this blogging function. So that's what I was using Facebook for in early days. But I remember distinctly as I was going through undergrad and delving into a more kind of complex perception of what it meant to be Asian in North American context, what it meant to be Asian Canadian. Social media was actually really helpful because back in the days before Facebook was inundated with misinformation, you could actually find relatively interesting articles being shared. And then social media took off in the whirlwind.
Yeah.
Wow, notes. I remember notes. I wrote some notes.
I remember the pokes too. People would
Yes,
poke
you
you.
could poke somebody to just be like, hey, what's up, kind of thing.
I always felt that was creepy.
Yeah, sometimes older guys would poke, and I'm like, ooh, that's not the vibe.
Back before Facebook had proper security
Yeah.
mechanisms. Although for a while I feel like it was okay. And then very soon, like all things good on the internet, it got looted and then it had to evolve. So
Yeah, it definitely has turned into a very different monster since we started.
I don't mind Instagram terribly because I DM a lot of my friends that way, but the only social media that I don't really mind anymore is TikTok. Everything else feels stressful.
yeah, that's fair. I think Instagram is probably what I focus on most. I thought I would actually stick with Facebook for much longer. I thought people at my age group might still use Facebook to update, but now I'm starting to realize the millennials are slowly but surely migrating onto Instagram as a way of keep in touch and update each other on things. And Facebook is starting to become the territory of, 40-year-old
Boomers, yeah.
The way that the algorithm has changed, like before when we were in undergrad, most of what I saw on Facebook was things that my friends posted about life updates or what they were working on or interesting things that they found. And now they're just boosting the controversial things that people post, the misinformation and just all the wrong things. They're pushing all the wrong things and all the things that I don't want to see.
Now it's nothing but memes and screaming into the void. So
yeah, and I just came to the conclusion that it's just not worth the time because you're not going to change those people's minds. If you have a friend you met in university and you don't really know them that well, I'm not going to argue with them. If you want to believe that vaccines will give you a chip, go ahead. I don't have time for this, honestly.
Also, audacious of those people to think that like the government wants to track their whereabouts.
Yeah, so part of me getting into all of this EDI stuff and thinking about that is sometimes when I would post on Facebook or Instagram, or I would share content or comments that was in these lines, I would get my family either contacting me privately and being like, oh, are you going to, for example, like Pride Parade in Toronto? I was like, oh, are you going to Pride Parade? I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm just going to see it. And be like, oh, just be careful at those. Social movements is the direct translation from Mandarin, but it has a very distinct provocative connotation. So a social movement doesn't encompass the protest element that the Mandarin phrase contains, but they would be like, oh, just steer clear of that kind of thing, or you might get people coming after you. I'm like, who am I? I am some admin person at university. I don't have state secrets.
That's interesting that the word for that in Mandarin is so loaded.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's why the Asian culture is very like, don't say anything, don't make waves.
Yeah, I think North American society has seen maybe less turbulent social movements recently. Black Lives Matter is a good example of a recent super turbulent social movement. And that was an idea of, yeah, this is real protest and some sort of reckoning. And even Stop Asian Hate is impactful for sure in relation to the pandemic. But I would say it is a more diffused movement. It's something that's always there, and that's really good. It's a good constant reminder, like it's a good vocal, visible rejection of the model minority myth. But in Asia, a lot of these student protests for democracy, etc., that was in the 70s and in the 80s, and pretty violent state responses. So I feel like that's still in people's memories, because that would be the time of our parents being university students, basically. So our parents were probably witnessing those kinds of things. That's what I tell myself anyway, if I'm annoyed. It's just a Pride Parade. The Pride Parade is not a protest. It's not. It's like a corporate Disney parade. Companies just throwing out rainbow swag everywhere. It's not actually a protest.
Yeah.
It's not what that is. Even though historically it was a protest. Now it's not. Now it's a corporate thing. Yeah. When I was like, why are my parents making comments like this? That's probably because they're remembering that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I've also gotten comments from mostly my mom. When I post something on Facebook or if I comment on something, she'll message me on WhatsApp and be like, do you really need to make those comments?
Yeah.
So every time I post something, I have to think, am I going to get a text from my mom that it makes her uncomfortable? And do I want to go down that rabbit hole?
Yeah, over the years, me starting to become exposed to EDI stuff, which was when I read Edward Said's Orientalism. It was a book that was written in in the 70s and 80s by this Middle Eastern dude. At that point in time, the Orient was still Middle Eastern. So you had the Orient, and then the Far East was actually the Far East. So he wrote this book defining Orientalism as a theory body, the way the West perceives the Middle East. When he was writing the book, it was in the context of the Middle East. But as it stands now, it's the way the West constructs what is the East, what this perception of the East is, and how the West interacts with the East or consumes the East, that sort of thing. I was in second year in a really dense East Asian Studies theories course. And then from there, I was like, oh my God. And then I went to post-colonial theories. Before that, I was an English major. I was doing Shakespeare courses. And then after that second year course, I was like, no, post-colonial literature, like, no. That was before 2010. So I think a decade of me very consistently sharing all this content. I think my parents, and I have relatives on social media too, they probably mellowed out me. They're like, okay, Sally's just like this now. Kind of stop her. And yeah, it would be stressful to stop me because you're 3,000 miles away from me. So get on with your day.
Yeah. What are some things that were light bulb moments when you were taking those East Asian Studies courses that maybe you didn't realize? You're like, oh, I didn't realize that was racist.
Yeah. My kid understanding of racism, which I feel like is the understanding that most young people and students hold these days, is when you say or do something, do other people react as if you're being an asshole about it? If they do, then maybe you're being an asshole about it. Or maybe that's racist. It's a very individual behavior standpoint. Was this behavior dickish? Yes, great, then you're a racist. But a lot of the knowledge that I absorbed through undergrad was learning about the social aspect of racism. So what is racism and what is homophobia? What is oppression in general from the societal standpoint? So beyond the individual behaviors, colonialism isn't just one emperor doing evil deeds across the globe. Colonialism is a huge systemic effort to extract resources, to dominate local populations, to completely exterminate local populations so that you have a new settler population moving in. So the big overall light bulb, the big supernova, is around perceiving racism and other forms of oppression as a societal thing. That actually caused a really negative emotional reaction in me, because if you're seeing something from an individual behavior standpoint, then there is a chance that you could change somebody else's behavior, or you could change your own behavior. You could get better yourself. But if you subscribe to the very social systems viewpoint of these things, then it's easy for you to come to the conclusion that it's a big system and you're just one person and there's nothing you can do. Right now, I would say I have a better balance between the two, which is a good goal to get to. But in undergrad, because I was learning all of this new stuff and it was because it was my degree, I was really into it. There was definitely a while where I was like, okay, a depressive mood because the world sucks and I'm just one person and I can't change it. So fuck it. Not a good mindset for sure. I think it may be a natural reaction to these kinds of things. But if people are in that mindset, yeah, it's helpful to get out of it because...
Yeah. So how did you find that balance? Because since the Black Lives Matter explosion of everybody learning about systemic racism, I think a lot of people are getting to that point where they're like, oh, fuck, this is way bigger than we thought. So how do you get to that balance?
I really should look up the accurate source for this, but in Jewish religious traditions and like religious commentary, there's lots of books on Jewish ideas around faith, etc., by Jewish philosophers over time. And there's this one particular quote. This isn't the exact wording, but it goes something like, there's work to be done and you don't have to complete this work, but neither are you free to desist from it. So it's a good depiction of that tension. For me, if you see the work is there, I don't feel like I can unsee it. If it's there and it's hard for you to completely sort of turn away from it, you could individually do nothing. You're just going to have to be okay with that there's something not good that's happening in the world. And you know that you have the ability and the resources and the time to help, but you're just going to choose not to. And I think initially I used to be like, no, I have to do something. And I would say I've learned a few lessons about burnout since then. So there are cases where you should choose to rest from the work a little bit. And yeah, there are cases where you should choose to rest from the work a little bit. People who might hold marginalized identities, you're not just your marginalized identity, you live it for sure. But when you are doing the work all the time, you risk reducing. So specific to this space, I risk reducing my Asianness to being like, yeah, I'm just going to combat the model minority myth. And that's what being Asian is in North America. And I'm like, no, that's not the only thing about being Asian in North America. Being Asian in North America sometimes means getting to watch your white friends choke on boba the first time they drink bubble.
Watching them try to peel off the lid instead of...
Yeah, exactly. Or watching them not stab the bubble tea with conviction and just bubble tea going everywhere.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's what it means. And that's great. Being able to rest from the really heavy work and having these moments, that's really nice. So there are times when you're free to, you're not obligated to complete the work. And I think that's a permission to rest, etc. But you're not free to desist entirely from the work either. I think it's a reminder that if you've got power and resources and time and you can do something, no matter how small. For a while, there was a lot of conversations around microaggressions and like, how do you combat microaggressions? And the reason they're micro is because they're one small thing that you can do. If you can do this one small thing and you choose not to do it, you choose not to do it out of a sense of, oh, it doesn't really have anything to do with me, or maybe you don't believe in that kind of change, then that's on you. If you look in the mirror at the end of the day, you okay with that? Then you're okay with that. So if you're not okay with it, then you got to make an effort to change it. So
yeah, you've been in residence life a long time, and I'm pretty sure you guys have a lot of training around diversity and inclusion. What are some things that you learned in that space that you wish the rest of society would learn?
I wish people would listen to young people more. I think that's a general thing that I'm coming away with from not just working in residence life, but working with students in general. Again, if all you're looking at is social media, then all you're seeing about young people is TikTok memes, funny Instagram comments, and fire emojis. But young people are a lot more than that. And it's so amazing that young people these days, young Asian Canadians, young Black Canadians, young Indigenous Canadians, I feel like Indigenous Canadians are the even further exception kind of thing. They probably know about this. So they've been living this thing and being aware of being able to articulate it probably for far longer than any kind of settler identities. But specific to this space, young Asian Canadians know how to articulate things at their age that I would not have known how to articulate when I was their age, because of the amount of information that is available to them, the progression in media. And we haven't really touched upon media, but when I was growing up, the big media piece was Harry Potter. And so I suppose I have for my media role model, Cho Chang, a girl with 2 last names for her entire name.
Oh my God. I have so many... yeah.
Yeah, there are many thoughts. Yeah, but kids these days, their major media pieces growing up is Avatar, The Last Airbender. If I had Avatar, The Last Airbender as a media piece growing up, oh my God. Yeah, Avatar, The Last Airbender, Legend of Korra, they have Steven Universe, crazy. It's so great that their starting point is so much further along than ours, and they see so much more possibility. And I think people sometimes think, oh, you're chomping at the bit a little bit too hard. You're biting off way more you can chew, or you're going a little bit too hard, et cetera, et cetera. But wasn't that what people wanted when we were pushing for greater Asia? Wasn't that what we wanted, is for people to be like, no, you can do this? Like when Netflix announces that it's going to do an adaptation of Avatar, The Last Airbender, people are immediately like, don't fuck it up. M. Night Shyamalan did. That's people were immediately able to articulate some level of accountability. Like, this is a standard that you've got to reach for literally any attempt at anime adaptation, like Ghost in the Shell, or that people were like, no, that sort of thing. Yeah, if anything, the sort of diversity trainings that get run in residence and the way that student leaders or residents or student housing operations do inclusion and diversity programming, I'm sure a lot of other work settings do similar things. But the thing that I think is more unique about a student housing or a student affairs setting is it's just such a young people's space. Of course, some of it is facilitated by adults, but it really is a young people's space. And yeah, I wish people didn't really come down so hard on that energy out there in the real world, with some guidance, because there are things that young people do need to learn, things about how to organize and how to effectively advocate, how to pick your battles, because young people have yet to learn lessons around burnout. There's things they learn, and it's our job to guide them to learn that sort of thing. Their starting point is so much further ahead.
I was going to ask, in your experience with dealing with students and being on campus, have you noticed any difference in how people of color are treated either by other students or by staff? Or because when I was at the University of Toronto, I didn't really feel that. And I don't know, maybe I just wasn't aware of it at the time. So I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, I probably have a bit of a biased perspective because the University of Toronto is an institution with a pretty diverse student population. There's so many different kinds of people interacting at the student level, at the staff level, at the faculty level. There are certainly instances where individual cases happen, but I don't know that overall there's a climate of, oh, you're treating someone differently. But when you get a lot of people with a lot of different combinations of social identities interacting together, sometimes you're going to get clashes. That is the par for the course of interacting with each other in a very diverse environment. So I think if anything, there is constant work that I see students and fellow staff do around me about how to consciously interact with somebody who is different from you in a work setting or in an extracurricular setting, how to account for all of these differences so that the experiences of students is still a really good thing and you're still feeling like a part of this post-secondary community. You still feel like you can succeed as a student at this institution. Yeah, the interesting thing that's occurring recently that I don't remember happening when I was in undergrad is the institution having programming that reacts to external social events. So possibly because I was deep in my studies and I didn't really necessarily pay attention to that sort of thing. But nowadays, I see much more visibly the university reacting to two things, not just social movements. So obviously, Black Lives Matter, the London, Ontario the attack on the Afzaal family and grieving the Afzaal family. I'm not sure if I said that last name correctly, but hopefully I did. A man drove a truck into a family of Muslim and only the boy survived. It was very tragic. Like those kinds of social instances or the discovery of the children's graves at Kamloops, BC, like these kinds of societal instances, the university does responsive programming that gives space for people to come together and process the incident and connect with each other. And that's available to students, staff, and faculty. And yeah, I think that's maybe a little bit different. Maybe Pride used to be categorized as these kinds of things, but it's just expanded a little bit beyond that, which is really interesting. So if there was any change, I think that's probably something.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard about the many anti-LGBTQ plus laws that are trying to be passed in the US. Are things different in Canada? Because I know Toronto is very diverse and very progressive, and it's this nice little bubble that I miss. But how is it in the rest of Canada?
Yeah, I would say the bubble was recently burst. I think the bubble has reformed, but it was definitely recently burst by the truck convoy protests. This was actually a learning, I think, from my Canadian literature course is like, what is Canadian? Not American is what is Canadian. And the course was humorous, and I actually examined that idea in the Canadian identity of very being distinctly, we are not American. We are not those. So that still persists, right? Especially in perceptions of the way that Canada handles a multicultural reality. Canadians are forever patting themselves on the back, saying, we're not like the US. But I would say the trucker protest maybe disproves that a little bit. For information, the protest at the start was ostensibly, allegedly organized against one particular vaccine policy that was going to be implemented on drivers, and many other sort of causes ended up being tagged onto that whole thing, and it became a mess of right-wing conspiracy theory, actual dangerous armed individuals, and was a reminder to well-to-do Canadians and well-meaning Canadians that you're not that different and that we're not that different. And I think the discovery of the children's graves at Kamloops, BC in the residential school, the Stop Asian Hate and its iterations in Canada, I think Canadians are experiencing a reminder that we're not that different. Historical Canada always used to have those heritage minutes on TV, and you're like, this is a part of our heritage. And I know there's definitely content there around Chinese migrant workers being a big part of the CN Railway, internment of Japanese Canadians during World War II, the head tax policy, like that sort of thing. There's all these things, but it's just so much more visible now. Again, thanks to social media and Instagram, you can just consume that content really easily and come by that knowledge really easily. If I go to events around learning about EDI, there's definitely viewpoints that in some sense Canada is lagging behind the US when it comes to these things because there's a propriety almost in place. Like we're almost afraid to talk about it because one of the national myths of Canada is multiculturalism, and it's this mosaic. We're all one big happy multicultural family, and that's a myth that if we're not that, then what is Canada? So questioning that is really tough. Whereas I don't think that exists in the US. The US has always known its own tensions around slavery and anti-Black racism and that sort of thing. The reckoning isn't so much about actually acknowledging that it exists. The reckoning is more like it's got to stop it. It's still reaching a degree of violence that is unacceptable, like that sort of thing. Yeah. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Or any better.
Do you feel like your ethnicity played any role in how you navigated being in the LGBTQ community?
Yeah, just to switch gears a little bit there. I'm not necessarily really in the other community, in a way that if I went to community events or if I participate in community organizations as a volunteer or something like that, I don't really have a presence there. Insofar as me interacting with that aspect of my identity is largely around consuming media and being comfortable with my identity that way, which probably bucks some stereotypes around bisexual people. I've been lucky enough not to come into contact with people expressing these kinds of negative stereotypes about bisexuality at me. I would say me interacting with the aspect of my identity vis-a-vis my Asian identity is probably more in the gender realm. So in North America, there's a lot of perceptions about Asian women and how sexy, how not sexy, how wild, not wild in bed, how demure, how strict. There's a lot of things, all of which grew from about 200-300 years of Orientalism and seeing the East or anything that's Eastern as definable. And yeah, so there's a certain perception around Asian women that I would say I'm pretty repulsed by every time I encounter, because it's always in a sexual kind of realm or a sexual context. And you're just absolutely not. In East Asia and in Taiwan, by contrast, or in Chinese culture specifically, there's also a set of very specific perceptions about what it means to be a woman in Chinese culture. There is 5,000 years of history behind that and 5,000 years of really male-oriented history that isn't necessarily examined per se. All the famous women that I've ever learned about in Chinese history are women who ruined empires, women who ruined empires either by being so sexy and beautiful that everyone forgot how to do their jobs, or by being the empress themselves, or women who are lauded for having done good things are almost like semi-fictional. Like Mulan is semi-fictional. The source is a poem, and it's not an actual historical account. It's very possible that women in nomadic tribes out in the borderlands of ancient China actually did participate in warfare. That's very possible. But the Mulan poem itself is a literary poem. So in Chinese fantasy or like Chinese martial arts fantasies and that sort of thing, certainly you have women who are powerful in those stories. But yeah, it's a very specific kind of narrative. A really good recent example was there was recently a show got onto Netflix, and it was a recent drama from China. It was a martial arts fantasy, and it was lauded for its portrayal of an LGBTQ romance. And I was like, okay, great, let's give it a go. And first of all, the Chinese culture has its own perceptions about the LGBTQ community. Specifically, there's a lot of trouble differentiating gender from sexuality. So in the same-sex relationship, someone is the guy and someone is a girl, like that. So there's some challenge still in differentiating those two concepts. But there was a female character in there. It was a very significant female character. She was the sister of one of the guys and the best friend of another, whatever. So it was like this trio thing. A friend recommended it to me. It was like, oh, you gotta watch this. And I got through maybe like about 20 minutes of the first episode. The whole thing was happening in the flashback. So it was jumping back and forth between 2 points in time. And in the present point in time, this female character is not there. And I was like, I guess she sacrificed herself in some way, shape, or form for these two guys. And that's why these two guys are just enemies now, hate each other's guts. And my friend was like, so do you want me to spoil it for you? And I was like, I'm right, aren't I? I was like, yeah, you're right. And I was like, how did I know? It's because women always die in these situations. So yeah, I would say that it's an interesting path to navigate. I'm both trying to navigate any kind of Orientalism lens being placed on me and trying to avoid that in the North American context, and in East Asian and in Chinese context specifically, like also trying to resist inheriting 5,000 years of sexism. So
yeah.
I wanted to ask you about that. Like, how do you be a feminist and be Asian? The gender roles are so strongly adopted, and it's just so deeply ingrained.
Okay, how to be feminist while being Asian, while being Chinese specifically. So I wouldn't want to speak for like.
Is that something that you just don't bring up with your family?
Yeah. So in relation to actually speaking it and naming it, for me, is not as effective as just actually doing it visibly, actively starting vis-a-vis my family. If I feel like talking about this, then I'm going to talk about it. I'm just going to talk about it. And I'm not going to preface being like, I'm about to go talk about a feminist topic. Like, preface it like that. You just go for it. And in workplaces, if talking about EDI stuff and just going for it and talking about it, I would say it was more effective for me than very specifically naming it, because to me, it was almost like if I named it, then it gave people grounds to argue that naming, to argue semantics or to take issue with that naming and get away from what I actually wanted people to focus on. So yeah, I would say, first of all, that is probably more effective. I think second is probably a lot of internal self-reflection. A really good example of this, especially vis-a-vis gender roles, is the color pink. So I used to not be into wearing pink at all, would consciously avoid that range of colors in my wardrobe, not even having to do with any kind of sexuality or perceptions of sexual desire. I was just like, no, I don't want to. Like, pink has that connotation. That connotation isn't as strong, I feel, in North America. It's maybe stronger in Chinese culture, like light pastel colors, very feminine. So for a while, I was very consciously, no, nothing but flannel checkered shirt. And then after a while, I was like, you know what? That pink shirt actually looks really cute. And I just want it. So yeah, I think after a while, you just reach a point where you go, oh man, like, why am I wasting my time thinking about other people? And I think this is easier to do when you're living independently. The person that will see you for the most percentage of the day is you. So other people are not going to see you for the amount of percentage that you'll see yourself. So
yeah,
why don't you just make yourself look cute? So I have more pastel colors and pink colors in my wardrobe now, which is really nice. Pink is a specific element, and dresses, like actual dresses, is another element versus overshirts or button-ups and that sort of thing. So I would say my wardrobe is still largely button-ups and stuff like that, and that's because it's my own gender expression. I'm not necessarily comfortable with wearing dresses 100% of the time, but it also doesn't mean that I don't have a really cute dress or two in the closet. So a lot of it is internal self-reflection. Okay, this is where my balance is, and I'm just gonna do it. If people have something to say about it, I know I look cute. Part of it is self-confidence too. Sometimes you just don't reach that until you get to a certain point in your life, and there and you're like, no, I'm cute. For all you other people having thoughts about it.
Yeah. So do you feel like you and your brother have a different culture from your parents? Is there that tension where you feel like you're very different in some ways in terms of what you believe in or what your values are? I know you and I have talked a little bit about, through talking to you, like your parents have moved a little bit more towards the Canadian way of thinking in a way.
Yeah, I think my thoughts on this is evolving at the moment. I'm trying to get to a point where I'm able to see where the lines of thought of my parents' generation is coming from. This might be a result of all of the recent intergenerational trauma call-outs that Hollywood is apparently hell-bent on doing to all the Asian, to all the AAPI people. But yeah, just trying to understand that this is the thought process that they've arrived at, and trying to not so much sway them to any particular better lines of thinking, but just helping them think about what their behavior kind of might manifest. And I feel like that's maybe a similar approach that I sometimes take if I'm talking to somebody or I'm working with people who might not necessarily, and for me as well, because I'm not some sort of EDI encyclopedia. There's definitely times where I really don't know what I'm doing, and just going, okay, I really don't understand where this is coming from, but I know what it means to be a polite person, a considerate person, and so I'm just going to start from there. And I revert to the sort of kid perception of, does this make you an asshole? No? Okay, I think you're probably all right. Does it make you an asshole? Yes, then don't do it. kind of thing. So I think a good example of this is faith. In Chinese culture, it's not so much faith as spirituality. So there's definitely spiritual traditions in Chinese culture around reverence for one's ancestors. There's folk tales that probably a lot of people have heard of around the Autumn Festival or the New Year. And there's lots of people in East Asia that follow a variety of different faiths. And there's a lot of people in East Asiatic countries, or probably in Chinese countries, that don't necessarily take that into account in their lives. So I didn't grow up with any spiritual or religious traditions. If I'm working with students students for whom faith is a big part of their identity and is a big part of how they guide their lives, then sometimes I have trouble understanding that. But plurality and pluralism and spiritual pluralism is an important aspect of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And Islamophobia is a real thing. Anti-Semitism is a real thing. But these are things I might not necessarily know immediately how to combat either within myself or in spaces. So I revert. And I feel like that's the approach that I'm trying to take with my parents. Like, this is the sort of life that they've lived, and I'm just going to try to work along with that. Same thing with other members of my family. This is the life that they've lived. And as long as you don't forget to be kind, then we'll just start there. And I don't want to spend like an hour debating with you all. Just don't be an asshole.
Yeah. Sometimes you just got to pick your battles.
Yeah. Sometimes you just got to pick your battles.
Yeah. So you mentioned a few Hollywood movies and also Harry Potter and all that stuff. Can you talk a bit about your best, worst, favorite Asian representation in media?
So it's funny that you mentioned Harry Potter, and you could be like, yeah, Harry Potter is pretty bad Asian representation, but it was so minuscule that I almost didn't clock it. Ariadne, I don't know about you when you first read Harry Potter as a kid, but Cho Chang I was like, oh yeah, there's this girl in Ravenclaw. Her name is Cho Chang. All right, back to Harry, Hermione, and Ron. She was so small in the world. She had like a slightly bigger role in Order of the Phoenix. But again, it was just, she was almost a non-representation. There was literally nothing that denoted her that was any level of representation of her being Asian other than her mangled name. And does that even count?
It was so bad, too. I hated how the character turned into, like, she cried all the time.
Yeah, and okay, this is her character. I suppose Lavender Brown cried a lot as well. But yeah, she was such a non kind of thing that I was just like, did that even count? So yeah, I would say, I suppose it's worse in that it was so bad that it was like a non-representation of like content-like thing. I feel like I had an interesting time growing up in North America and consuming media because the most major piece of North American content that I really consumed growing up was Harry Potter. And living in an immigrant community with all of these other kids holding similar combinations of social identities, I actually grew up consuming a lot of East Asian content. So a lot of Taiwanese and Chinese dramas that would flow over into North America, that would be playing on Chinese television channels that were on TV back then. Watched a lot of anime. I was a huge nerd, so I bootlegged all the series and watched them. And then the Korean wave came, Korean boy bands. And then the next time I actually turned to North American representation of Asians was Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is a great representation of Asianness, Asian culture, values on North American TV. So yeah, portrayals of Asian women, there's definitely a scale, and even media coming out of East Asia, there's a scale of this is a really typical portrayal. And a lot of these media pieces have romantic subplots, and there's a whole thesis to be written there. Female Asian characters and female characters in Asian or Chinese storylines, where they end up. It's really nice that recent pieces of media are becoming a little bit more diverse. Yuri on Ice. So Yuri on Ice is about 4 years old at this point, but really neat portrayal of an LGBTQ romance that gained mainstream attraction. It was portrayal of an LGBTQ romance in a way that I haven't seen in anime, which is really nice. Yeah, the recent Mulan movie, the live action adaptation, there's a lot of mixed feelings around that. I didn't watch the Mulan live action adaptation because when I heard Mushu wasn't going to be in it and then I heard Shang wasn't going to be in it, I was like, then what even is the point? Yeah, female empowerment, great, everything, love it. But grandma wasn't going to be in it. I was like, grandma was the best part. Like,
I know. It's not even the same movie at this point.
No, it's not. And I understand Disney was really like, oh, we want to get Chinese culture when we do Mulan. We want to respect that culture and that source material. As if the original Mulan animation didn't do that. And it did. It was a different kind of take on it, but it did. Not that I don't know Asians coming out of the Mulan animation being like, wow, I'm high-key offended.
It was perfect. I loved it.
Yeah. So then after Mulan, then they did Shang-Chi, which was okay. I feel like they've learned their lesson a little bit from Mulan doing Shang-Chi. So they didn't go as hard on we got a accurate representation. But for example, fantastical creatures that appeared in the movie, I was like, yeah, these are actual fantastical creatures that Chinese folk mythology examined. And props to you for making the Hundun, which is the bread thingy that had 6 legs, wings, and no face. And I was like, oh, great, you made the Hundun really cute. It's supposed to be this eldritch, terrifying monster. Now it's a furry bun. one with, yeah. And Everything Everywhere All at Once is probably the most recent one that I saw. It was everything. It was everything everywhere all at once. It was awesome. Yeah, I will say I definitely have to be in the specific mood to watch this kind of movies because intergenerational, it's like really raw. It's like you want to be seen, except then they're like, it's aggressive compliance. Yeah, okay, you want to be seen? All right, we will see you. We will see you. Like The Farewell, I can watch The Farewell. I know Aquafina is incredible in it. I can't watch The Farewell. This is way too raw.
I had trouble watching Turning Red. I couldn't watch.
We were like, no, we can't do this. No, this is too much.
It's too close.
Yeah, way too close. I feel like it's the same feeling that maybe Colombian or Latino kids got when they were watching Encanto. They're like, okay, you want to be seen? We will see you. We will put all the subtle traumas that are on you into this movie.
What's so crazy and what I really love about Encanto was even if you weren't Latino, it really hit. And I was talking with a lot of my Filipino friends. This movie feels like it was written for us too, because we all went through the same issue. Yeah. Intergenerational trauma is specifically an immigrant thing.
Yeah.
Or if you're from a diaspora community. So yeah, that was one where that was hard to watch. And then when Abuela apologized, I was like, oh, that wouldn't really happen in real life.
Yeah. So I think those are some of the best representations I think of. But yeah, sometimes you're just like, wow, this is like really raw. Like, I can't watch this just yet. Have to go to one more year of therapy before I can watch this.
I know. Yeah, which many of us in the Asian community have trouble admitting. Mental health is such a taboo still. I've been a big advocate for mental health in my family, but I know that it's still very hard for people to seek help. I think people think that if you go to therapy, that means nobody in your life wants to listen to your problems. At least that's the sense I get from the Asian community. Yeah. And I've been trying to help people see that it's not that, but it's so hard.
Yeah, it's an interesting,
I also feel like because I'm Filipino, they think that therapy is somehow a betrayal of your faith. Oh, you should only be able to depend on your religion. Like, why do you need therapy? You have Jesus, you have God. And so that's another layer of that view on therapy.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting manifestation of the collective element that's present in a lot of East Asiatic cultures. Your social bonds are super important in a way that it isn't in North American society. Not that social bonds aren't important in North American society, but there is a specific element that's more pronounced in East Asiatic or Southeast Asiatic or Chinese culture. So it's interesting that going to therapy or examining yourself and treating yourself is like an invalidation of those social bonds. I know that members of my family or other Asians that I've come into contact with, it's also the same thing. And I suppose in a way, maybe it speaks to that very strong social bond and you just have that trust in that social bond. It's been there your whole life. It hasn't let you down. And then there's I guess, a sort of acceptance of, things are going to be crap, but you still have that social bond and that's what counts in the end. And again, that's the life that some of these people lead. And that's where I try to draw the line is if you start to hurt yourself and you start to hurt others. And I think that's maybe coming from my work in student housing and student services as well. You can't mandate students autism as long as the individual themselves is not being hurt, as long as others are not being visibly hurt, etc. Okay, that's the decision you make. You don't want to go to a therapy like carrying the Asiatic identity. No, I'm not really into therapy. I'm not that kind of emotional. I don't have that level of emotional vulnerability. I don't want that level of emotional vulnerability. Okay, if I see you, passed out next weekend in some residence hallway because you decided to drink all your sorrows away again, I'm gonna have some questions. So as a hypothetical example, I haven't actually experienced that. But as a hypothetical example, that's the kind of you do what you gotta do. But if you end up hurting yourself and you end up hurting others, then that's where you gotta make some changes.
Yeah. So if hypothetical situation like that happen, what should people do?
As in, if somebody is hurting themselves and
let's say somebody in your family who obviously is struggling with depression and they don't want to go to therapy, they don't want any intervention. What can you do? Can you do anything?
So I should preface by saying I'm no mental health and no health expert or professional. So this is very informal, experiential kind of advice. Safety planning is one thing that people should look into, and it doesn't have to be anything official. Generally speaking, you're an adult. You're supposed to be able to take care of yourself and make your own decisions. So planning based around that might be something helpful to do. So if someone is not willing to seek that kind of help and there's some real problems and you have some real concerns about this individual, setting some sort of plan in place to help keep the individual safe. It's a balance of you being able to check in with the individual and the individual having that level of autonomy is probably a good step to start with. Yeah, normally I think people are okay with, it depends on trying not to be too invasive and that sort of thing. It takes some self-awareness, I think, on the part of the individual trying to reach out as well, because it's an exercise in trust. When you're like, okay, the next time I hear from you is going to be X number of time has passed, and you just trust that things are going to be okay in the meantime. Drawing lines in the sand is probably a pretty helpful thing to do for both parties. If you're making it clear, for example, someone had a really bad weekend with a substance or something like that as a manifestation of them experiencing mental health challenges. If the line in the sand is, I can't see you land yourself in the hospital again, I can't see you do XYZ again. If this happens again, I'm calling ambulance help. This is what is happening. The intervention is happening. If this happens again, the intervention is happening. And that line in the sand is not a punishment. Because it has to be in very direct, firm language, I think some people feel like, oh, this is a little bit of a harsh step to take. But I think that boundary is actually quite helpful for individuals. If you're experiencing a mental health challenge, sometimes you're not in your own brain and your own brain is doing things that you're like, I would never do this if I was in my own mind. So external boundaries sometimes really help at how other people are going to react. And that helps you regulate and check yourself a little bit. Not to say that sometimes these boundaries don't end up being crossed anyway, but when they do get crossed, you know it's serious business because it's possible that they actually really tried and they still crossed that boundary anyway. That's when they're really not in their brain and you need help. So
yeah, so it sets a benchmark that both parties can refer to. And
yeah, exactly. And then you adjust that over time. It's good practice for what mental health support actually is like. Because I feel like that's probably a lot of mental health support is this is what you're like right now. Here's a couple benchmarks and you go away and you practice them for a bit and we come back and we see how it is. Not counting taking medication and using medication to supplement that support, but just speaking from the risk.
Yeah, that's good advice. All right. So we have a few rapid fire questions to end the interview.
So these are just quick answers. You don't have to explain. You can if you want to. The first one is, what was the first language you learned?
Mandarin. I wish it was Taiwanese, so my parents can't shit taught me in Taiwanese, but it's whatever.
What language do you speak with your parents?
I speak Mandarin with my parents.
What's an Asian food that you should like but don't?
Durian? Yeah, that's true Asian. I respect anyone who can eat a durian. I can't.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah.
What is an Asian food that you'll never get tired of?
Asian food that I'll never get tired of. Taiwanese beef noodle soup forever. All seasons, all days of the week, all 3 meals.
What's your favorite fantasy book?
Favorite fantasy book. My favorite fantasy book is The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. It's technically a sci-fi novel, but it's very soft sci-fi, and it is incredible.
I'm going to have to look that one up.
Yeah, really great exploration of gender.
Okay, cool. What's your favorite classic literary work?
My favorite classic literary work. Is there a specific time?
Let's go medieval.
Medieval.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
Let's stick with one period.
Okay, let's go medieval. Paradise Lost by Milton. Yeah, Paradise Lost. It is peak Bible fan fiction.
Yes.
Put it out there. With all due respect to the Bible. This is peak Bible fan fiction.
No, but That
That's
one.
The best form of flattery, to be fair.
Exactly. I like that and Divine Comedy. Those are my two.
Yes. Again, peak Bible fan fiction.
Right. Okay, and I have to ask, this wasn't listed, but I just out of curiosity, which is your favorite Harry Potter book?
My favorite Harry Potter book and favorite Harry Potter movie is Prisoner of Azkaban.
Yes, that's the best. Alfonso Cuarón is like...
I feel like that's a consensus, that the third book was A+.
Yeah, and the film too.
Yeah, I felt like the latter books were
And the films got progressively too Hollywood towards the end. The last 2 films were so Hollywood.
I honestly don't remember much of the movies.
Yeah.
That might be why. Talking Hollywood.
All right. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Here are our takeaways from today's episode. Number 1. Sally grew up in a diverse city with other Asian Canadian peers, which helped her feel less alone in her experiences. This is why diversity and representation matter. Number 2. Even if you speak the language of your home country, there are still things that can get lost in translation. Language evolves, and members of Asian diaspora communities don't always know the current slang used in their parents' languages. Number 3. One of the trickiest things to navigate as an Asian diaspora person is balancing Eastern and Western ideals. For example, choosing an area of study purely based on your own interests and dreams rather than a career your family wants is a more Western mindset, and it can be difficult to explain these decisions to family members. Number 4. Being vocal about social issues is something that a lot of Asian diaspora members have had to grow into. It wasn't ingrained in us to be vocal about these things. We were taught not to make waves and not to rock the boat. But now, more than ever, it's important that we use our voices to talk about things that matter. Last week's guest, Edmund, talked about the hashtag Pride in Every Color and how he is creating a safe community to share our voices. We encourage you to find them on Instagram and TikTok and interact with their content. Number 5, racism is not just an individual behavior. It is a complex system that encourages and facilitates racist behaviors or policies. Number 6, as Asian diaspora members, while it's important to help do the work of dismantling colonialist oppressive systems, it's also important that we give ourselves permission to rest. We do not need to reduce our identity to only doing this work. Number 7, sometimes it is a tricky balance to navigate being feminist and being Asian and being LGBTQIA+ and being Asian. There are Orientalist tropes and sexist mindsets to get past. Gender norms are often more binary in Chinese culture, whereas in Western countries, diverse expressions of gender identity are more common and accepted, but Asian representation tends to be lacking. Number 8, not all Asian media representation is good. A lot of it is based in stereotypes and not well researched. Their Asian identity is often a punchline or their entire personality. It's important to push for meaningful representation that portrays Asian characters as complex human beings rather than tropes. Number 9, mental health is still a taboo subject in many Asian families. If someone is struggling but refuses to get help, setting boundaries on what behaviors would be deemed serious enough to call for professional help can be useful for both parties.
And that's it for today. If you know someone who would enjoy this episode, we hope you'll share it with them and build on our show to have your own nuanced conversations